You've reached Hotel Pacifico, your 5-star destination for BC politicos. Press 4 for room service. Press the star key for your hosts Mike McDonald and Kate Hammer.
Welcome back, guests. Good to see you both, Mike and Geoff.
Well,
Right.
Kate, I am today. I've considered my answer on this. I am very good with zero margin of error, 20 times out of 20.
Okay.
Very on brand. Mike is setting up the episode. I'll say first, today in the strategy suite, we'll do a deep dive on vote splitting. We'll set it up with a check-in on what's going on with BC United and with the Greens, and then we'll tuck into some more riding by riding analysis with what that could all mean on E-Day. But first, our guest today, you probably heard his name a million times, but how often have you heard from the man himself? Today's guest is polling legend Dr. Angus Reid. Angus is Canada's best known and longest practicing pollster and founder of the Angus Reid Institute. He spent more than 4 decades asking people what they think and feel about top social, governance, and economic issues. From 1979 to 2001, he was founder and CEO of Angus Reid Group, which grew into the largest research firm in Canada and which he sold to Ipsos. Then in 2003, he joined his son Andrew's research software startup, Vancouver-based Vision Critical, as CEO. When he retired as executive chair in 2014, Vision Critical had 600 employees worldwide and revenues over 100 million. He knows polling, he knows business, and today, more than the name, we've got the man himself. Welcome to Hotel Pacifico, Angus Reid.
Good morning.
Morning, good to see you. Can you take us back to, I'm always curious how people get into these sort of careers that I'm sure aren't the bingo sheet that your high school guidance counselor offers you. How did you end up?
How did it all happen? Well, script essentials. Look, I'm a sociologist. I decided in the 1960s when I was choosing a career and I had a choice between becoming an economist or a sociologist as an undergraduate. And I really, in that time of student protests, race riots, etc., sociology seemed to be a more interesting, the canvas there was much broader than just economics. And so I went on, did a PhD in economics at Carleton University, became a university professor. And then one fateful night and I was teaching research, among other things. And one fateful night in 1977, 78, I had a knock on my door from a guy who was a buddy of Lloyd Axworthy saying, we've had this poll done by Marty Goldfarb, and we're not sure about the results. And when you look at it, and that led me down a path wherein we redid this survey for Lloyd. Said, look, Lloyd, the Goldfarb survey said, don't run, you'll get defeated. We said, no, that was done badly. You'll win easily. He did win easily. I began to think, I'm kind of bored being a tenured professor at a university. It's time for something new. So I started a little company called Angus Reid Consultants. I think that was our first name back in 79. I was in Winnipeg of all places, which people used to laugh about. I mean, yeah, if we ever have anything we need in Winnipeg, we'll give you a call. I mean, it was really, but Winnipeg had its advantages, and so I built a firm out of there over the next 20 years that we sold for about $100 million, the biggest transaction in our industry, I think, to date, and that came about, I think, through a confluence of factors. I wasn't a businessman at the time. I didn't know the difference between a balance sheet and a balance scale, but I learned pretty quickly. And, we were able to jump on, three big trends. Technology, which gave us a lot of speed, ways to find increasing loyalty of respondents, and some of the great advances in sampling that came through the telephone era of market research. So that was, in a very clipped way, what took me to 2000 and the sale to Ipsos. And during that period, we did a lot of public opinion research, obviously in Canada. We were, for a while, we were owned by Southam from 89 to 94. They've since become Post Media, which is a whole other story. We were the Globe and Mail CTV pollster from 95 until when I sold the company. So, during that time, we really did, a lot of work in polling, and I think really were able to build, a very good transnational. We weren't just in Canada. We had significant operations by that time in the U.S. as well. So that's how I got into it.
Well, most of people's exposure to pollsters is through the political polls because they get reported in the media.
Yeah.
But on the business side of polling, it's probably about less than 1% of your revenues, I'm sure.
Well, it's 90% of our headache and 1% of our revenue. And, back in the day, media actually had money to spend on polling.
Yeah.
In the 1984 election, the Toronto Star paid my old friend Marty Goldfarb about $250,000 for its polling. I mean, that's unheard of today. The media spends nothing today.
Nothing.
Almost nothing, unless you're the CBC. But so really that whole world has changed a lot.
Yeah. So what if you mentioned you got into it with Lloyd Axworthy's campaign, but I seem to recall you emerged more in the public consciousness in maybe the mid to late 80s. Were you doing stuff with the Liberals federally?
Well, what I did, I was in my early 30s at the time, and as a result of the Axworthy involvement in the 79 election, I became sort of the Western Canadian pollster to the Liberals, which occurred in the early 1980s. We did a lot of work on fairly obscure issues like the crow's nest rate and stuff that no one even cares about anymore. But so I was fairly close and became in 1984 the lead pollster to the John Turner campaign. That was an interesting experience because it really left me a little soured by the end of that rather difficult campaign about ever being a party pollster again. And I really decided post 84 that I would never become anyone's party pollster. But that was a good period in the sense of learning a little bit more about the trade from the inside, as opposed to the work I've done since then, which has all been public polling as opposed to party polling.
Can you talk more about why you soured on that?
Well, I soured for a couple of reasons. First of all, there's a tremendous number of people in a campaign that want to push the polling scale one way or the other. There's a lot of competing interests. So you're not really able, there's a lot of obstacles to just say, look, here is what is happening. For instance, when we were dealing with the infamous John Turner or Pierre Trudeau appointments at the start of that campaign, which was really a seminal event. We had other pollsters that were working with the Liberals who were Toronto-based. In one case, the wife of this pollster had been one of the appointees, saying, "Oh, this is a nothing issue; it'll blow over." I'm looking at our data and saying, if you don't do something about this, you're going to lose the election. So that common fighting about really what the numbers were and how they worked, and there were people associated with the Liberal Party that were very disdainful of the fact that I was not part of the Laurentian elite. I was not part of the little cozy group of Ottawa, Montreal, Toronto pollsters who have typically been in this business. I typically, and have always been a bit of an outsider in terms of that central Canadian group, have always operated out of Western Canada. So that left, a bad taste in my mouth. And, then the ongoing battle after that to become the official pollster of the Liberal Party just looked too difficult. Who needed it? I thought there was going to be a much better opportunity to work with the media to use some of the tools we had developed there, which was really speedy overnight polling. And that was something that had been lacking. The major media polling back in the mid-'80s was being done by Carleton School of Journalism and Gallup. They would do a poll in October, and it might get reported in December. We were working initially with Southern News, and with the Southern papers, we were doing a poll on a Tuesday and getting the results out by Thursday. So this was a big revolution in polling in Canada in terms of just providing very quick reaction. And of course, we were dealing with the first Brian Mulroney term, which was great fodder for the media because he was proposing all kinds of fairly dramatic new policies. And we were getting back very quickly on Canadian public opinion on them.
Well, what are the biggest changes you've seen in the industry since you started? I mean, we talk about social media, IVR, and so on. What's the biggest change you've seen since you started?
Oh, boy. Well, certainly the whole technology has changed. The first poll I did personally was 50 years ago, over 50 years ago as a graduate student, and that was in-home face-to-face. The cost of those, and that was really the mainstay of Canadian polling for really from the late 1920s until the mid-1970s. And in today's dollars, one in-home face-to-face interview would be about $90. So, so the cost has really dropped. Today, depending on methodology, you can do a survey for anywhere from close to free, in the case of the IVR crowd, to, there's still some people doing telephone interviewing, and those run at 10 or 12 bucks, each. So the cost factor has really dramatically changed, which has allowed a lot more interest. There are more pollsters than there's ever been. It used to be an industry that actually required some level of certification to get into, required some capital to get into. Now, Geoff, if you wanted to set up your own polling firm tomorrow, you could buy an IVR machine for $10,000 and you'd be away to the races. So cost factors have changed. Speed has also changed. I mean, now when we do a survey, we can look at results in real time as that's being done. In fact, as we speak, we're doing a poll in America looking at Joe Biden's Supreme Court proposed changes, and also looking at reaction to the new VP nominee. And I can look at my computer and see when we've got out of 2,000 interviews, I can look at 300 that have already been done and see the results. So that's amazing.
That's probably online, like an online panel. You're
Online, yeah, and really we went through largely 3 or 4 phases here. In-home face-to-face, that moved over to telephone, which was a really great, and I won't go into all the methodology. It was a great methodology because it allowed for very accurate sampling. Telephone polling, except in some bizarre situations, is largely defunct. So everything is online, but it's a question of how it's done online. And one of the problems, of course, with the media is that anyone can just say, well, this was an online poll. And that could range from something which is a piece of total garbage bought from a very cheap firm where probably half of the respondents are bots, through to some really well-constructed online panels that, in which millions have been spent building and maintaining that very large pool of potential respondents. So it's we have really moved into a free-for-all, which is, if we had any media left, it would be very confusing for them.
There's no one left to confuse.
There's no one left to confuse. Right.
What are the real world implications of that, though, Angus? And I think you're describing like a trend line that is more polling and more lower quality polling broadly. What does that mean? What does it do?
I don't know if it's all lower quality. I mean, look at a company like YouGov, which I have a high degree of respect for. They're not in Canada, but they do a lot of work elsewhere in the world. They do very good quality work. They've got a market capitalization of about $1 billion, and they're very, very serious pollsters. They were set up by Nadeem Zawawi, who was actually very briefly chancellor. He ended up becoming a conservative MP in Britain. But they do really good work. And then there's all kinds of Johnny-come-latelys, if people still use that term. Anyway, who out of nowhere are suddenly reporting polls. I was just looking at the New York Times. Of all of the polls that come to Nate Cohn at the New York Times, they sift through them all, but they're still reporting now, I think, 260 different presidential polling organizations in the US. So the business has really rapidly changed in terms of political polling. Everybody thinks it's a free way to get lots of media attention. And so, it can be very confusing. And here in BC, we've got polls over the map in terms of what's likely to happen in the next election. I know we're going to talk about that later, but it is it's a very crowded field, and it's frustrating for me, who have been at it for a long time, and we've invested a lot of money in it, to see the media treating, just almost everybody equally. Oh yeah, this was an online poll. We have pollsters who actually refuse to say where their online polling is coming from, because you can do online polling in a whole variety of ways, some of which cost you almost nothing, and some of which are very expensive.
What's your opinion on these? The media seem to give a lot of credence to these poll aggregator sites like 338.
Yeah.
That take all that, put it in a blender and average it out. I'm assuming you're not a big fan of that.
Well, the poll aggregators, in many cases, the aggregators themselves have never done any polling.
Yeah.
I mean, we got Fournier in Canada at 338, and we've got the guy that used to be at CBC who's suddenly escaping my name.
Eric Grenier.
Yeah, Eric. Yeah, and look at these. I've got nothing against these people personally, but they've actually never done a poll. But look, there's way too much emphasis. Let me start by saying there's too much emphasis placed on political horse race polling. It is frankly the least important issue that I set up the Institute, Angus Reid Institute, as a not-for-profit foundation / charity in order to do substantive research on issues of interest to Canadians. At the very bottom of our list is jumping into the horse race polling game because, it is frankly not what's really important. What's really important is how are Canadians struggling with daycare? I mean, we've had all kinds of government publicity and propaganda on $10 daycare, but how many Canadian women who would like to work are actually having trouble getting daycare? And I can tell you, because we have some numbers coming out of this, I'm not going to give you the numbers now, but it's a big, huge problem that we care about. So we honestly, the fascination with the horse race and who's on first and who's closest to the pin when you finally get to election is, in my view, a bunch of hokum. And it is the least interesting thing. At the end of an election, you'll get the pollster saying, "Oh, I was within 0.3% of the final result." Well, by the way, that within any statistical methodology is simply dumb luck. That has nothing to do with any precision. You've got guys like Nick Nanos, we call him Decimal Duck Nick. Does Nick, because he puts his polls out showing that the Liberals are at 25.68%. I mean, this implies a level of precision that is completely misleading. And it's, frankly, it does nothing to help. But my career, what I'm up to now, the least thing I'm important, or the thing I'm least important about is just doing another horse race poll. I am interested in just the plethora of issues that we need to look at that deal with public policy, which deal with the epidemiology of Canadians. We've done work on Canadians' experience with prescription drugs, and there are a tremendous number who are not taking drugs because they can't afford them. I mean, and I'm not here, and the Institute is not here to push any particular ideology, but try to develop some accurate measures about the conditions of life in this country.
So about life in the country and life in British Columbia, like what over the breadth of your career, what are some of the big trends you've seen in how society has changed? Because you're measuring it a little differently than the average person, right? We all measure by our own life, but you're seeing it macro.
Well, macro in many ways, we have become a more liberal society. I mean, polling that we did back in the late 80s, early 90s on things like, can RCMP officers wear Sikh headdresses, and how do people feel about gay marriage? And I mean, there's a whole set of issues where Canadian society, unlike American society, quite frankly, has become much more liberal, much more progressive right across the board than we've seen elsewhere in the world. So that's one trend that we've seen. But we've also seen, though, an increased level of hostility, if you will, a divide between urban and rural Canada. And this has got implications for policy. It's obviously got implications for voting. We have the major cities, Vancouver, Toronto, Montreal, heavily ethnically diverse, heavily buying into generally a much more progressive agenda. We have folks in remote and rural areas far more likely to feel left out of the whole equation. And those rural and remote areas, coming back to politics, have a lot stronger votes, if you will. Their votes count for more than the urban votes. So there are some cleavages there that I think are noteworthy, that need to be studied, examined, and I think brought to the fore. But I think the biggest single thing that I've noticed that I think is having a massive impact on Canadian society is the death of media. I mean, we used to look at the world, even though we had differences of opinion across the board, we had 5, 6, 7 common lenses in which we could see what was happening. And now there are several thousand lenses. And, I look at the work which we've done on millennials and Gen Zs in terms of media engagement. I mean, there's a generation under 30 that simply doesn't read newspapers, doesn't watch the news, gets their information on TikTok, and their level of susceptibility to all kinds of nonsense is really quite disturbing. And so, and I don't know where that's going to end, but really, if I had to put my finger on one thing, it is this death of media, which in Canada is very unique in the sense that, we had the Aspers. I was very close to the Aspers living in Winnipeg for many years. They managed through a variety of maneuvers to hasten the death of post media, which is dangling on a very slender thread right now, owing a lot of money to debt holders in New York. We have the Shaw family, which was engaged in a somewhat questionable sale of Global for billions of dollars to Chorus, and Chorus is now within days of going bankrupt and taking Global with it. I mean, these are frightening times, and this changes totally the public opinion dynamic in this country, in that if we lose that center of gravity in terms of information, then the level of dispersion, the level of, frankly, a lack of interest in the nation is at stake.
I relate that to actually, and I think Shachi and I perhaps talked about this when she was on, and sort of reflecting on how there was a time when what you consumed was probably some geographical element, because if you're based in Toronto, you're more likely to read the Toronto Star and the Sun here. So there's this geographical element, and then over that you have a newspaper that's been curated by the masthead editors with a sort of like, these are the things you need to know. Modern context, the geography's kind of gone, because if you're on social media, you're looking at feeds that are actually determined by an algorithm, and they're kind of, you're predisposed by basic other interests. And then you're also, it's reinforcing existing interests or biases. So as we think about sort of the trend line of what are the interests and the priorities for voters, like what's going to happen? I mean, because you're kind of naming it too, in terms of, your priority is understanding what matters to people. Well, if those things become disconnected, if what I care about and what I consume is like less geographically rooted and less about what's actually having impact on my life, like how do I become engaged? Like, where do I start to care?
Yeah. Well, I think one thing which we are actually at an era where we're now approaching a point in which there is a significant amount of engagement, which is called wallets. It's called money. So we have really, for the first time in my career, a younger generation that feels completely dispossessed, that the odds of owning a house seems remote. The whole, I used to think back in the 80s, the most important thing for Canadians was owning their own house. That was if you wanted to say, what would be the seminal symbol that I've made it, that I'm okay, I own my own house. That's a piece of real estate I've got. And that's central to family, it's central to who I am and community, et cetera. We have completely dropped the ball for whatever reason on that. And so it is quite stunning, the number of Canadians under 35, under 40, who not only don't own their own house, but despair at ever owning their own house. So yes, part of it, as I said, is due to this very voluminous, very diverse media environment that we're in. But part of it is just due to the physical reality of Canadians as they have to pay their bills and deal with some very basic wants and needs. Now, I think what's driving a lot of politics right now, it will be interesting to see what happens in the BC election just around the corner and in the federal election, is that these are constituencies that typically have leaned a little bit more left. I mean, Canadians under 40 are, tend to be much more progressive, et cetera. But now that they're faced with these, very massive economic issues, I think that we could see some real pot boilers. I know, and I know we're coming back to politics. I do care about politics, but I just care more about trying to go a little deeper than just, who's on first in the horse race. But so I think that's a big factor in terms of the reality today. Mixed messages in media, but a very, very tough position for a lot of Canadians.
Do you think that there's unexpected space opening up on issues like women's rights? You talked about childcare. Inability to own a home really is in some respects a proxy for inequality, the inability to get economically. Do you feel there's new space opening up that hasn't really been exploited on the center left that maybe the Conservatives are doing a better job at?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think that, the center left on a lot of fronts has really let down a lot of their own constituency. That's housing. That's the whole, the overflood of immigration. The center left typically has been not an anti-immigration group, but, when you start getting, and I saw a number recently, 10,000 new immigrants coming to BC every 35 days. I mean, that at some point becomes tilt, and we've just gone too far. Healthcare, which was typically the major touchstone of the center left. When you talk to people and you gave a list of things, what does it really mean to be a Canadian? I can tell you for decades, people say, well, our healthcare system, that's really where we stand out. And we have now, I could show you, I don't have it in front of me, but the tracking on that has gone totally downhill. The number of Canadians who now believe that we need to privatize a chunk of the system equals about 55%. If you looked at that 25 years ago, it was 5%. So really, on some of the most cherished areas of the center left, the ball has been dropped. And so where do we go from here? And I'm not sure, and I'm not here to provide an advertisement for Pierre Poilievre or for Rustad or others who have their own solutions. But these are big problems, and the center left, I think, is going to have to find a new way forward. For example, on housing, is it just a question of buying up more housing to give to to give out at below market rates? I mean, that's a drop in the proverbial bucket. It's largely symbolic. Or do we embark on massive improvements in transportation infrastructure to use the tremendous amount of land we've got to build new housing and deal with these issues in the future? In the case of healthcare, I saw a very good article today in, of all places, the Toronto Star, the owner of the center left in Canada, and talking about how, in other countries in Europe, there's a great deal of autonomy given to individual hospitals to make their own decisions. We tend to operate, here in BC, Adrian Dix operates, and I like Adrian, but he's operating a quasi-Stalinist, multi-billion-dollar, trying to run the whole bloody healthcare system. Well, I don't know, is that going to work or not? So far, it would seem no, but yeah, so that's a really
Stalinists come in many forms.
Well, it's quasi
the BC Liberals
Stalinist.
Probably could have been accused of being healthcare Stalinists.
Yeah, no,
as
and
well.
I think, by the way, and look at our friend who's the Premier of Alberta. So this, but anyway, we are faced with, for the first time as a country, very big existential issues about our precious healthcare system. And, we did a piece a year ago looking at Canadians and Americans and access to healthcare. And we found that our sample of America, and it was a good sample of Americans, had better access than we do. So I know that wasn't published by a lot of our media because it sort of ran against the conventional wisdom that we have the best in the world. But
there have been times in, certainly the last few decades where populism has kind of overwhelmed an elite consensus.
Well, hey, look, as a pollster, I'm on the populism side.
Yeah.
Look at what's happening in Venezuela right now. I love it when people want to kind of, dump all over pollsters. Oh, you guys are, we'd be better off without you. And I look at places like Venezuela, where their faux election without really good exit polls, we would be in a very different position in terms of trying to face the state of democracy there. Joe Biden was convinced to leave his position largely on the basis of some good polling, not IVR, by the way. As you can tell, I'm hugely not a fan of IVR. I think it's the most disturbing, unreliable approach to polling, no names included. And there's a lot of people, by the way, the IVR business who do a lot of weighting. So anyway, so I think that that polling has provided and provides a very useful tool for decision makers, tools for analyzing what's actually going on. But that's the end of my advertisement for my little industry.
Well, I want to get back to that methodology discussion in a second, but I want to go back on populism and apply to geography for a second. You know, my shorthand for understanding the political map of either Canada or British Columbia these days is that the rural areas tend to be pretty locked in towards a conservative option. Not exclusively, but for a large part. The urban, highly urbanized areas, university districts, tend to be the most either federal Liberal or provincial NDP in our case. But you've got this swath of seats in the suburbs, whether it's Metro Vancouver or whether it's the 905 or whatever. And to me, that's really where the action is on politics these days, because they're not as tethered to one particular worldview like rural or highly urban might be. Do you generally agree with that idea?
Well, first of all, let me just say on the younger university vote, what's happened to Justin Trudeau is a lot of that vote has walked away from him for some of the economic reasons that I just mentioned. So the biggest single change that's happened in the last 2 or 3 years and the work that we've done is the loss of that young vote, including even younger women who used to be, massively fans of Justin Trudeau. So having said that, sure, the suburbs, and let's talk about Canada, 905 south of the Fraser, unique Canadian situation, tend to be heavily recent immigrant based, ethnically diverse, if I can use that term. And so there's been, and I think much more movable than some of the, entrenched political attitudes.
Also a higher percentage of people actually in the workforce too. Like they tend to be younger families and
right.
All more middle class.
Angus, I just have a question that I thought you'd dwell on a bit. And it jumps from what Mike's saying. It seems to me that increasingly sophisticated polling, or polling that's more informative, is bearing down not on my opinion or my income level, but my attitudes or beliefs and values. And that's helping people make different assessments politically. So in an area that's very diverse, like a suburban area, contemporary polling, at least this was my perception, I'd be interested in your reaction, looks deeper at what's moving people, what is their value set, how are they responding to certain issues, more so than how do you feel about today's development on whatever issue. And that's a critical change that is moving politics quite a bit. Is that your view, or am I off base?
But there's two dimensions to that, Geoff, and one is a whole kind of cluster of attitudes around what can be loosely termed the culture wars. I mean, we've done a lot of work, and we're actually going to repeat the big piece we did last year in the culture wars. But these are, in the US and in Britain, the culture wars are very much at the surface. You've got the Telegraph versus the Guardian. You have very, very heated debates. In the US, you got Fox News and Breitbart and a variety of other sources versus MSNBC and the Washington Post. In Canada, again, because we really have no media, these issues don't really find the same kind of home, apart from, maybe at the CBC. But yes, that is one big dimension that is working its way beneath the surface, which is not talked a lot about, but can play a big role. And we see here in BC, Rushdad really jumping on that. I mean, just on the sacred CBC issue of special rights for Indigenous people, I can tell you right now, the Canadian opinion is split 50-50 on just the broad issue of should there be special rights or not. So, yeah, there is that one side of things that needs to be looked at, but the other side, it comes back to looking at, again, fundamental economic issues of people's ability to keep a household, raise a family, and maintain a modest lifestyle. And when you've got
Yeah.
a number of
See if
Canadians,
the emergency room is open.
well, keeping the
And-
emergency rooms open, and also, with people coming off of, mortgages, as you well know, where they were paying 1.5%, and suddenly they're going to be paying 6%. I mean, this has a very deleterious effect on not just the economy, but also the mindset of those people involved. Like, what is happening to us? So this sense of a loss of control, plus a sense of being left behind value-wise, represents a petri dish in which some powerful political changes can take place. And the work that we've done, and I know we're going to talk about BC later, but the last big piece we did in BC, we saw some shifts south of the Fraser, which would be concerning if I were David Eby and his crowd, because and that is largely a suburban area, and one that if it shifts, the tenor of the province could shift as well.
Let's jump into the petri dish of BC politics. Have you ever seen a situation in your career where a party that was elected with 0 seats has arisen to contend for power within the space of 1 term? I mean, I know we saw lightning in a bottle in 91 in BC with that, but that happened mainly in the Writ period, which was a different thing. But over the course of a year, the BC Conservatives have, depending who you talk to, it depends who we're talking to you, Angus Reid, you guys have them in the 30s at least. How do you explain this as a pollster?
Well, I
What's
mean,
happened here?
I think it speaks in part to the point I just made, that there are a lot of not that public, but strongly felt views on many of these culture war issues, combined with these economic issues, which sadly, in the case of BC United, Kevin Falcon has just completely failed in the minds of a lot of his supporters. In fact, a lot of the members of his own party, including elected members, failed to take a position on. And I think that in these tumultuous times where, let's face it, the NDP doesn't have massive approval ratings, there's a lot of hurt in the province of British Columbia on various levels. And have I seen this before? Well, we saw Bob Rae come from almost nowhere in Ontario in 1985, 86. This one is pretty spectacular, although we're into a period of spectacular. Look at Nigel Farage in Britain and a brand new party coming and capturing almost 20% of the vote. So I think that we're in a time that is ripe, it seems, for much more explosive changes. And we could do a whole other podcast on why that is. But in the case of BC politics, we've had this guy who, by the way, no one knows about. When we ask people to identify him, they can't. So he is largely this mythical figure who has apparently touched several nerves in terms of both these other 2 broad issues of culture wars and economics that people care about. So the forthcoming debate in this campaign will be the most seminal, important debate, I think, in the entire process, because finally we're going to see, who is this guy, John Rustad? What is he all about? So I think this election could have some very dramatic outcomes. We're not in the position at Angus Reid Institute of doing a poll every week. We're going to do something, in the next little while. And when we do it, we want to do it with a very large sample, very carefully, and really looking at the connection between the issues that Geoff raised and political choice, and really trying to look at how much of that electorate is movable. Because at any given time, there's a big chunk of movable electorate. If you look at choices right now, people don't just choose to like someone, they also choose to hate someone. And hate may be too strong a word. If you look right now at the supporters of Kamala Harris, 50% love Kamala, but 50% hate Trump, and they're voting to block. So the real question is going to be how much how much underlying anxiety and concern in a province like BC is converted into disdain for David Eby, which then results in people choosing a guy they don't even know. So, I mean, the overall complex is not just how much do you like John Rustad, but how much do you hate what the NDP are doing, and we'll see how that comes together.
And
Well,
so
is
far,
there-
you're tracking on Premier Eby's. He's doing okay based on the Angus Reid tracking over the last.
Yeah, his approval rating dropped 5 or 6 points the last quarter, and we do that each quarter. So he's now down in, I think the low 40s, which is, as premiers go, not too bad.
Yeah.
His personal cred is pretty good, right? He scores very well on intelligence. He scores fairly well on compassion. The issue is going to be whether he can withstand the onslaught that comes during the course of the campaign on these underlying issues, for which he needs to have, be able to have some kind of a credible point of view on. And, there's, we did work on the Indigenous issue when it was announced that they were going to do the big land transfer, and found 85% of Canadians were against going, or people in British Columbia were against going all the way. There's an issue which I understand Rustad wants to push. It's not really at the top of the consciousness. Is that one that could change views? I really don't know at this point.
Is what is making people movable changing, especially in light of what, different media consumption?
Yeah, I mean, well, people, first of all, there's a very large repository of voters who have not totally made up their mind, federally and provincially. Okay, federally, we see the delta for Pierre Poilievre as being a low of 28 and a high of 55. I mean, so, really there's a lot of people that are in the process of, finally coming down to, and finally, I think they're going to wait until quite late to come down to a choice. And then, of course, it's going to be all about turnout. So here in BC, I think that, I think that we are, there's a square that's got to be circled by Eby, which is, he is seen as the strongest of the three leaders, but he's dealing with a province which is really suffering on a bunch of fronts. So that is going to be his challenge, is to say, looking forward, I've got a credible solution for solving these issues. And the other side, and the problem is the other side. The other side right now is this bizarre, I mean, it's one thing, Mike, to talk about, it's kind of different to have a party come from nowhere to be a potential governing party, but we could have, the United/Liberals under Falcon actually running a campaign against John Rustad and not against David Eby. So, I mean, we this is silly time in terms of just where everything's at. So
combined with disappearing Greens, who may not even be on the ballot, and half the ridings are more, which you got to be on the ballot to get the votes. But so, with all that in mind, yeah, I mean, put you on the spot here. I mean, how should we handicap it at this point? Do you see a pathway for the Conservatives as the main challenger to get to 47 seats? Do you see that as viable? Because I see a BC United vote split get in the way, among other things.
It depends on how far that vote, it really depends on how far the split goes. And it also depends on whether there is a deal to be made. And I know there's a lot of backroom people trying to work this out, but look at what happened in France with Macron and the attempt to block the right. They basically came in, the various parties on the left, and said, okay, you guys are strong in Lyon. We won't run anyone in Lyon. We're strong in Marseille. We'll run. You won't run. So
that happened on the second ballot, though.
That happened on the second ballot. Well, I know they have a better democracy, I think, but nevertheless,
if only we'd reform the system, Geoff.
Yeah, Well, we had more than 50% back in Gordon's era, but so I mean, I think that is the biggest question: is how far down is BC United/Liberal going to go? And are their voters even going to be motivated to turn out? That's almost got to be looked at on a constituency by constituency basis. But if I had to handicap it, I mean, I think right now, I would give, I'd give a 55 to 60% a probability to a return of a somewhat weaker NDP, but an NDP that continues in power. Now, that's probably worth nothing. Don't go to Vegas and bet on it because, a week's a long time in politics, as they say. We are going through a very, very changeable time right now, and it's all going to come down to how Rustad looks coming out of the gate, and he really hasn't been out of the gate yet, and whether or not, yeah.
It was reported last week that BC United wants to have reference to the BC Liberal name on the ballot.
Yeah.
And this is partly what drove their low polling numbers, I would argue, in the last year, is that people are like, who the heck's BC United? But do you think they'll make a difference?
I don't think so now. A lot of the polling that we did in the course of the last year would be reminding voters that, by the way, BC United is the former Liberal Party.
You had that in your questions, yeah.
Oh, yeah. By the way, there's certain things we can actually do in a proper online survey in front of you that you can't do hitting some phone buttons on a piece of IVR nonsense. So there you go. One more shot. But
the ship is
we'll
sunk.
see. Listen, I think that I don't think that's going to get them very far. There still is a probability that Kevin Falcon and his members may end up doing a deal, some kind of deal with the Conservatives. There is, I know there's among people in the business community and the right in BC, a very, very strong motivation, stronger than ever, to try to unseat the NDP. So whether those forces are successful in terms of getting some kind of rapprochement between Falcon and Rustad is unclear. But if that doesn't happen, for sure the NDP is going to get back in. I shouldn't say for sure, but I give more probability to an NDP re-election.
Well, it's good that we maybe end a discussion on the word probability, considering who we're talking to here. Angus, it's been a real pleasure to invite you into the Hotel Pacifico today for a chat. We're definitely going to want to do it again. It was a highly engaging discussion, and I'm sure our audience is going to love it.
It was fun. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thanks for stopping by.
Yes, as politicos, we know that healthcare is never far from the top of the list of issues that voters care about. I often have quibbles with the way these voter priority polls are framed, as the language can be pretty broad and leave a lot of room for interpretation. And in the end, a lot tends to get lost when the wonks working on the platform try to turn voter priorities into workable policies. Still, as we head into election season here in British Columbia, it's a pretty safe bet that we'll be talking a lot about healthcare, particularly when it comes to wait times and access. Presenting sponsor TELUS is helping out on that front, supporting marginalized and underserved individuals across Canada with essential healthcare services through their TELUS Health for Good program. These custom-built mobile health clinics are equipped with state-of-the-art medical technology and staffed by healthcare professionals offering a range of healthcare services directly to those who need them most. They offer general health checkups, diagnosis, and treatment of common illnesses, vaccination screenings, and health education to prevent diseases. TELUS mobile health clinics also offer support and management for chronic conditions such as diabetes and access to mental health professionals for screening and support. As you can imagine, a big part of the upshot here is the alleviation of pressure on traditional healthcare facilities by providing low barrier access points for medical care to those who need it most, which is the kind of good thing you just know is going to be popular, even without asking a policy wonk, focus group, or a pollster.
Hello, you've reached the Hotel Pacifico Strategy Suite.
All right, so that was a good discussion that actually sets us up perfectly with Angus Reid, setting us up perfectly for the discussion we're going to have today in Strategy Suite, just about vote splitting and what it's going to mean on E-Day. I think there's a lot to pick apart. But first, how was your long weekend, guys? We didn't catch up.
Were you on a boat again, Geoff?
No, just sunny and warm.
Thunder
Island, breezes.
I was up in
Oh,
Whistler.
lovely.
I was up in Whistler and I ran into a BC United leadership candidate from previous leadership race. So that was highly exciting for me.
Who was that? Allowed to say?
Oh, it's very very private.
He didn't get permission. He didn't get the release. He didn't get the signed release to say.
I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to tell you.
Okay.
Hidden,
Candidate's note, it's safe to talk to Mike McDonald. He will
hidden
not out
phrasing
you.
there.
Yeah.
But it was also good to see you
Oh.
guys in person last week. We were at our, actually, for those in Vancouver who like glimpses of Hotel Pacifico guests or hosts from time to time, we are known to hang out at Tableau. We very much like the outdoor deck there. So thanks
It
to
is the,
Tableau for always
Feature
making
on
us feel
Melville Street.
welcome.
can we call
Yeah.
it the official hangout of Hotel
I
Pacifico?
think it is the official hangout of
Yeah.
Hotel Pacifico. It's on,
Yeah.
for those of you who don't know, it's on Melville. It's
Yep.
on
Yep.
Melville. That's
Yeah.
a great spot. Great spot. So
The heart of the West End.
we're
Okay.
very, it doesn't sound very grassroots of us, but, well, we could find, Hotel Pacifico hangouts in different towns around the province, actually. We should
Well,
look at it.
and we need one where we can wear Hawaiian shirts and throw darts, right? Like,
That's right. Oh, the
That's
Red
the
Lion.
measure.
Red Lion is the
Yeah,
unofficial
yes.
hangout in
I'm not
Victoria.
going to
The
say
Victoria
anything about
hangout.
Andrew Weaver.
And we haven't mentioned
Eh,
Glenn Clark yet this
Andrew,
episode.
yeah, Andrew Weaver's the new Glenn Clark.
There you go.
And also mention just to mention one of our former guests on the show today, Daniel Marshall, the historian who came on about a month ago.
Mhm.
He informed me, just texted me just before the show started today to say his book is #1 in British Columbia now on the bestseller list. And I believe it's top 20 in Canada on the Amazon. So good for you, Daniel. We were ahead of the curve in booking him as a guest. So we're happy for his success.
When you finish that, go and get his book on the gold rush, right, Mike?
That's
Oh,
right.
yeah.
The, Claiming the Land, his previous book. That's right.
This is like my summer of getting BC history, like in books. This is great. Gold Rush next. Okay. So let's dive into vote splitting. And I think to set this conversation up, it's worth talking a little bit, I think, first with about BC United, because we've talked a ton about what the polls are doing. I think we all know what the trend line is, but obviously underneath that, and one of the important things to watch is that BC United, of course, just comes with all the sort of, with the much more mature machinery, I'll call it, let's say, than the Conservatives, despite what the polling says. And I think we've seen some signs of that this week, with Kevin Falcon really leading the way on a couple key issues. I'll kick it off actually with the tree fruits issue, which is it breaking this morning, Geoff? I think that finally the EB government did weigh in to step in and save this tree fruits co-op.
Well, I don't know if save is the case, but just to sketch it for listeners, the BC Tree Fruits Co-op has existed for more than 80 years as basically a buying and selling cooperative of orchardists in the Okanagan. So they would bring all of their, they jointly paid for cold storage and for shipping, and then collectively bargained with buyers to sell their fruit. And it was a very successful model for a long time. In recent years, they've had some trouble, some internal trouble, but also I think like a lot of co-ops, we've seen this with Mountain Equipment Co-op and small credit unions, difficulty switching up to confront a lot of the changes that are going on in the supply chain and recapitalize. But the shocker came last week, I think, not more than a week ago, when suddenly the co-op leadership announced they're shutting down right in the middle of the harvest. And I do have to say that for a government that's prided itself on quick response, the EB administration was flat-footed on this one. This was going to be a problem, and it's a broadly respected and revered organization in the agriculture sector generally, but especially in the Okanagan. And the first response from Pam Alexis, who's quite an experienced politician, and now the agriculture minister, was, well, they've had their problems, and she said, we saw this coming, which raised the question of, well, why didn't you do something? This was 300 small farmers, for the most part, with large crops on hand that were literally going to rot if they couldn't find a way to get them into some kind of cold storage and then to market. So very quickly, Kevin Falcon and John Rustad jumped in to say, this is terrible, something should be done. And now this week, Pam Alexis has announced there'll be an emergency task force and that some effort will be found. Apparently, some of these farmers have found their way to market somehow or other. But the bizarre part of it is that the co-op assets are still there ready for use. It's just that someone has to find a way through this shutdown and possible receivership to protect the farmers who really are blameless in whatever unfolded at the co-op. So I think it's a bad look, really, and I hope that it can be turned around, at least for the farmers' sake.
Well, it was a good, I mean, politically, it was a good opportunity for BC United to jump
Yeah.
on an issue. They got credit from Von Palmer on that and had some good press. I think anytime that happens psychologically, it feels good when you've been on the mat for so long that you actually can, feel like you got a punch in. And I think BC United feels like they're competitive in the Okanagan. They have some strong candidates in Kelowna and Vernon, and this is an area where as their support has shrunk throughout the province in many cases, this is one area where they arguably still have life. So ever more important for them to hit strongly on that issue there. Now, who knows what the circumstances were. Was Pam Alexis? Maybe she's on vacation. I don't know. Maybe it was just they underestimate the issue. I always felt like that would be the type of issue that Lana Popham would be all over. Like
Mhm.
she didn't leave a lot of daylight when there was problems in agriculture and her speaking out on them. So that
Well, she knew the sector very well, and she was very, very good, especially during the floods that occurred in the Fraser Valley a couple of years ago, was critical in maintaining government's strong ties to the agricultural community out there, which was not going to support the NDP, but had very real problems that needed a direct response. So it's not to knock Pam Alexis, but to say that the overall machinery of the NDP needs to sharpen up because they've been very responsive on a whole bunch of fronts. In fact, gave $70 million to the wine industry when a cold snap killed all the grapes earlier this year. So, I take your point, Mike, but it gets to what we wanted to talk about at more length, which is how the splits in the vote may work between the Conservatives and BC United in the weeks ahead, especially in ridings where there's strong incumbents or historical involvement with the community as a municipal politician. I think that it's going to be really a riding by riding kind of fight in some of these cases to see who gets most of the vote, whether it's a pro my representative vote or an anti David Eby vote. How it plays out is going to be very, very interesting and hard to forecast, I think, until the last minute.
Yeah, well, you're getting ahead of us too, because I think the other point from this week I wanted to pull on was Kevin Falcon talking about involuntary care on weighing in on the safe supply issue. I think in one of the more, I'm going to say probably one of the more politically palatable frames we've seen. I think coming in a constructive way in that way, and I think that's exactly the kind of stuff you see from a government that from an opposition that has experience in government and has sort of a bit more of the experienced people around the table who can help you thread the needle on tough topics like safe supply.
Well, yeah, and up until the September 20th, they still have all the resources in the caucus, such as a research bureau and a communications bureau that can support all these pre-election issues that they can jump on, which can create some confusion. I understand on the Curse of Politics this week, Corey Tenike was, admonishing BC United for basically being alive still. I haven't heard it yet. That's the way it was explained to me. Yeah. But, they are alive and they're not going away because, frankly, why would they? They're, they've got over 60 candidates. There's a leader there. Why? They're not just going to fold up their tent and walk away unless there's some kind of deal. And I don't know that that's going to happen.
I have to cast back, although it's always traumatic, to the 2001 election, where the NDP, then under Ujjal Dosanjh, had overstayed it was at the full 5-year mark, basically, and deeply unpopular. But the campaign that year was also a march of doom. There was a complete air of defeat hanging over the whole thing. Ujjal Dosanjh had a hard time campaigning, and there's all kinds of stories, some true, some not, about how dreadful it was. But it was really dreadful, and we wound up with 2 seats. I see Kevin Falcon being much more combative, in spite of everything, in the current circumstances than I felt maybe Ujjal Dosanjh was at that point in that long mandate. And that's why I think it's going to make it even more difficult to forecast exactly how it plays out. But he doesn't seem to be fazed by this, and he keeps throwing pitches, swings, and some of them are connecting.
Okay, let's build this out, and I want to stay with you, Geoff, because I think if we're talking about this riding by riding dynamic, the other factor we have to talk about is the Greens, who, if you go back to 2020 anyway, you know, they were at 15%, 2017, they're at 17%. It looks like that's going to be their historic high. I mean, Geoff, you knew them well at this juncture, and worked closely with them. What's changed with the Greens? Why are they looking so different in 2024?
Well, it'd be good to have one of them explain it, but I'll go back in time to Adrienne Carr, for example, who was really the founding leader of the Green Party in BC, and she's still on City Council in Vancouver. She came out of the Wilderness Committee, which is a very important, and still is an important province-wide grassroots organization that brought in a whole conservation ethic to the Greens. So if you were very concerned about old growth forest or the future of the salmon, that was who you needed to go to. In later years, there's been a second major, I would say, current in the environmental movement in BC, which is people are more focused on climate change. And they are going to also be concerned about, old growth forest and spirit bearers and that kind of thing. But they also have a very much more deep criticism of fossil fuels, oil and gas development, all that kind of thing. So it's not either or, but one is much more, I would say, technically focused, more pragmatic, arguably more middle class, and the conservation side is more grassrootsy in some respects. They've lost their connection to BC politics. How that happened, I'm not sure, but right now the Green Party is not really speaking for that movement, and it's disconnected. Carbon tax is in the ditch as a policy initiative. And really, there isn't a huge conservation question that you can point to where you'd say, okay, well, that was the Wilderness Committee or Dogwood or whatever did that. And as a result, or maybe because of, who knows, you see the Green Party just slipping to irrelevance politically. And I think, maybe we'll see, when Adam Olsen decided not to run again, that was the only safe seat that most Green watchers were offering them. I'm not sure what will happen in that seat. It's not out of the question. It could even become a non-NDP seat, although the NDP's been strong there. There's been historically people from different directions come from there. So that split is receding in importance. What's becoming more important is what our early on guest, Jess Ketchum, called the not NDP vote. And that's where we're going to spend a lot of time, I think, over the next few weeks, trying to see what's happening to that not NDP vote. It's not going to be Green, though, in most cases.
Mm-hmm. Well, can I pick up this up too? Because I was looking back at 2020, and on election night in 2020, we had about 4 ridings that were too close to call. Like, there was a good number in that election that were really, really tight. So I think you can look at, existing seats and predict there's going to be a lot of upset with the currents we're seeing. And you've got to really zero in on each riding to understand what the implications are. So that's what we're going to do. Sorry, did you want to add something, Mike?
Well, just on a macro basis, like
Yeah.
when it's a closer election, the NDP benefits by vote split on the right.
Right.
That was the story in 1972 when they got elected. It was the story in 91. It was the story in 96.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't really the story in 2017, but there is the very high-profile Comox example, which catapulted them into power. It was a conservative that made the difference in that one particular seat. Now, so in the 96 example, the BC Liberals actually won the popular vote by 3 points over Glenn Clark.
Ding, ding, ding. Good.
Ding, ding,
Thank you,
ding.
sir. Thank you.
And Reform BC, led by Jack Weisgerber, only got about 9% of the vote, but they got about 20% of the vote in the interior, or a lot of interior seats. And that killed the BC Liberals right there, was where there was regional strength for what the third party, that even though they didn't win seats other than 2 in Peace River, they doomed the BC Liberals in a whole bunch of seats because they just, the NDP were able to win with 35% of the vote here and there. And that's the situation today in the southern interior, particularly, maybe some in the north and some in the burbs, is that BC United is just going to do a little bit too good. Or maybe, maybe they're going to win some of those cases, or finish second to the NDP. So it's, there's not enough clarity for the Jess Ketchum's not NDP party.
Well, where do you put Fraser Nicoll in that, Mike? I mean, that's been a perennial pattern. NDP's had many
Yeah.
strong candidates and often hope to win it. It hasn't won it since Harry Lally, who strangely then became, I think he's now a BC United supporter, isn't he? I'm not sure.
Well, if you applied
candidate.
recent polls, like let's just take Mario Canseco's recent poll that had the Conservatives at 38%, but much higher in the interior. If you applied that on a seat model, that would probably be a Conservative seat for Fraser Nicola. But Jackie Taggart's the incumbent.
And before that, Harry Lally of the NDP, then of the NDP.
Yeah, it was always
Well,
been
I
tighter.
just can't imagine Jackie Taggart getting less than, say, 20% of the vote.
Right.
And even if she got 15% of the vote, the NDP probably get elected in that case, because the Conservative will have a tough time getting enough votes to get past the NDP, because the NDP always come close in Fraser Nicola. So that's a classic example there where the strength of the Conservative juggernaut in the polls, once it actually gets applied to the riding level where there's real people involved, I'm not saying the personal brand of an MLA, it's very rare for them to buck a trend and actually win, but they'll punch above their weight in terms of what the cold numbers would indicate.
Can I go into one that I think is murkier? Can we go to the burbs? Yeah, and because I want to talk about Surrey. Yeah, Surrey White Rock. That's right now. That's Trevor Halford. He won 2020 by like 200 votes. Outspent, I think, a fair bit his NDP opponent, a fair bit on that one. That said, it's a riding that, like, since it's existed, basically has been held by BC Liberal, Tracy Reddy's, and I think Gordy Hogue before that. So, but then they've got this fantastic NDP candidate this year, Daryl Walker. Is that right? Is the candidate in Surrey White Rock?
Mayor of White Rock, yeah.
Yeah,
Former head of the BCGU.
Yeah.
Right.
So, like, what? Sorry, this is a confluence of factors. Like, what do you think's going to happen there, Geoff?
I don't know. I don't think that Trevor Halford's victory was very compelling, as you say. Darrell Walker was a successful mayor. He did not run again, as I recall. It wasn't that he was defeated. But I think that's one of those ridings that has way back in the distant past had NDP support and has always had some. We'll just have to see.
I don't think it's been on. I mean, I'm guessing that in the last election, no one had the NDP winning White Rock.
No, I said way back in the distant past. I'll take your point. But I think, Darrell could make a difference there. He actually was strong as a mayor because he opposed high-rise density. So it's interesting to see him join this team, which is so committed to density.
Well, he lost the mayoralty to Megan Knight, who sought the BC Liberal nomination against Trevor Halford. Halford was appointed, and then Megan Knight became the mayor. Anyways, just say there's a lot of personalities involved here.
Just take a pause here to acknowledge that Mike McDonald is the encyclopedia of
I know. It's fantastic.
Anyway, I just forgotten about Daryl Walker's defeat.
AKA
anyway,
nerd.
No, encyclopedia, sir.
I give up. I don't know what will happen in White Rock, but I wish Daryl all the best.
But the point on White Rock, though, is that of all the seats in Surrey back in BC Liberal era days, that was the number one seat. And there was never really any question about who was going to win it. There was a little heart flutter in a by-election in 1997 when BC Reform was trying to get it on a by-election, and it wasn't even close. Gordy Hogue won it. But this is the kind of seat that if you're the Conservatives and you're looking to form the government, this has to be a no-brainer. You just can't worry about White Rock. You have to steamroller it, because you got to worry about Fraserview. You got to worry about Maple Ridge. You got to worry about 15 or 20 seats in the true battleground. If you're sweating it in White Rock, you're just not going to be able to spread your attention and resources. Yeah, it'd be too vast of a challenge. Too many seats up in the air. So this is the problem with the vote split. It is a seat that frankly should be a gimme, Daryl Walker notwithstanding, is not a gimme. And that's therein lies the rub.
So is there like going to have to be just way more work than there would be in a normal election year, and understanding where you're putting your resources in a riding perspective? Like, there's a lot of winds you're reading, I think. And a lot of assumptions you'd normally have you can't make.
It's a bit of whack-a-mole. Like If the sweep is on, the sweep is on, but I don't, what we're
Yeah.
looking at here though is a war of attrition between the NDP and Conservatives once they get into the battleground, and it's going to be close in a lot of seats.
But would the split go the other way, Mike, a bit in Kamloops? I mean, you have two long-standing BC United, BC Liberal leaders, front bench people. The NDP's always had hopes there, but never quite closed the deal, not for a long time. I suppose possibly a strong Conservative there could produce an NDP outcome, but it's more likely to be, you would think, Stone and
Todd Stone and Peter Millibar have great personal
Should
brands
have
up
on.
there. And,
Yeah.
I said in an earlier episode, we might see some microclimates, where it might look bleak for BC United elsewhere, but is Kamloops a microclimate? Is Prince George a microclimate? Is Kelowna a microclimate? We really don't know that without better, available riding data, which I don't think anyone's particularly interested in paying
Well,
for.
one that cuts the other way a bit, I think, from an NDP standpoint is Vernon, partly because of the tree fruit issue we started with, because Harwinder Sandhu is an emergency room nurse. She's an outstanding constituency person and very hard worker, broadly supported, I think, in lots of ways, but was under siege from the moment she got elected because BC Liberals, now BC United, really felt that should be their territory, and she took a lot of flack for a new MLA on a lot of fronts, and people were sent from all over the Okanagan to complain to her because she was from the government about whatever the issue was. But she's going to be, I think, facing severe headwinds in this circumstance, and again, it's possible a split could help her out. But
Well, it's
I wish
another
her
real
all the
split
best
issue.
too, but
The Conservatives actually haven't put a candidate forward in that riding yet, and
Mhm.
BC United has a strong candidate. I believe it's the Mayor Lumby,
Right.
who's been out there for a while, and that's one where the backroom pictures would say, for Pete's sakes, just Conservatives, endorse the BC United guy. He'll win if you do that. If you run a candidate, the NDP might win.
okay, shine the light over to Boundary Similkameen briefly. There's a tree fruit angle there too, because Rolly Russell, who's a parliamentary secretary for rural development, I forget if that's the exact term, but interesting guy, organic farmer, trained environmentalist and so on, but also elected official in Grand Forks and showed a lot of leadership during flooding there, is the incumbent. But Mike, you think, again, no Conservative as yet, which seems odd to me.
I don't think so. BC United's running the former mayor of Oliver. And again, another strong candidate. And Boundary, as you well know, Jeff, that was Bill Barley's turf back in the 90s. And, the NDP have federal member there as well. And it's always close. It's always close. And you just can't start splitting votes, if to a serious degree, if you want to win that seat, if you're a free enterpriser.
Right.
Does the state of the Greens really change the dynamic in the Sea to Sky riding that was so close last time that they nearly won? And who are they running there actually? Do they have a strong candidate?
Well, in West Van Sea to Sky, the Greens are running the same candidate. He's been campaigning there for a while, Jeremy Valarote.
Yeah, that's right.
And so he's probably being held back by the Greens being on a bit of a fade. Yuri Fomer, we talked about recently. He's the Conservative candidate. He was a BC Liberal. He's known in the West Van set. I don't know up in Whistler whether he's known, but he'll bring resources. He'll be serious about it. BC United's not nominated. And the NDP have Jen Ford, who's Whistler councillor and former president of the UBCM. So that could be a real three-way race already. Could be a very interesting four-way race. I would predict to be one of Richard Zisman's top three.
Yeah, it's an interesting one to follow. There have been Green Party members elected mayor in Whistler. And, very diverse. So Squamish is exploding as a suburban community. It's a dormitory community.
Squamish they got a lot of greenies in Squamish, that's for sure.
Yeah. Should we do a plug? Should we do a plug for Richard Zisman there, just in his riding watch? Yeah. Just
I'd like to invite Richard onto the show here to sit here and go through his list of 93 most interesting writings from bottom to top, and will take as long as it takes.
Yeah, we're totally.
Richard, I dare you.
We're here for it. Totally.
Okay,
Extra
Donald's-
long,
Donald's
extended
thrown down.
episode.
Hotel Pacifico after hours.
I love it. That's
I don't
great.
know if
All
our
right.
producers love it.
Well, we said it out loud now.
Who
Unless they
cares
edit
about
it
that?
out, it's gonna happen. All right.
Who
Let's
cares
make it
about that?
happen. And let's go grab a drink.
Let's raise a glass or take a shot. Time to raid the minibar.
Okay, I'm going to raise a glass to Bo and Ma, who's been doing stalwart service all summer, having recently had a child, now working very hard on the emergency measures front. But I thought did a very capable job over the last few days, helping people understand the disastrous slide, which seems to be resolving itself on the Chilcotin River, but could have turned into a tsunami of mud and debris that went all the way down to the Fraser and did serious damage in many, many ways. So thanks to Bo and Ma for lots of careful work on that and the wildfire front. Good job.
Nice.
I will take a shot. I will, I wasn't there, but I will take a shot at the pro-Palestine protesters who disrupted the Pride Parade on the weekend. And basically, as I understand it, kind of cut short the parade or reduced its, duration. And, it's a free country, people can protest, but I really believe that when you're disrupting another event, another happening that people have come together on to support another very important issue, you're really undermining your own case. And I think there's already very strong views on this issue already. But I don't think they won any points, any brownie points by, just causing a major disruption and impacting people's enjoyment of that parade, but more importantly, impacting a message that is important once a year through that parade to get out. Comes out in many different ways throughout the year in other venues, but in that case, I just think they went beyond it, and I would say generally, I think there's a growing impatience with these protests across the country that is undermining support that might exist for their cause. So that's my shot.
Interesting. All right. Well, I'm gonna go totally to vacation mode. It's an August episode of Hotel Pacifico because I wanted to I guess I'm raising my glass. No, I'm taking a shot. I'm taking a shot at the CDC in the States because this is the time of year when I used to, our dog passed away recently, but I used to cross the border regularly with our dog. And for a hot minute there, it was going to be a bit of a nightmare for Canadians crossing the border. And you were going to have to basically like pop into the vet and then across the border. And it was just the most ridiculous thing ever. And I guess I'm raising my glass. No, I'm taking my shot at the CDC for the idea. I'm grateful that it got pulled at the last minute. And now in
CBC or
August,
CBSA?
CDC, the Center for Disease
CDC.
Control.
Oh,
CDC,
okay.
sorry. Oh, wow. Sorry. Yeah, not CBC. CDC, Center for Disease Control in the States was going to make us all go to the vet basically within something like days, like a couple days of crossing the border ever with your dog, which if you live in BC, you probably go over to the States all the time to a cottage or have a friend you might go to, there's tons of reasons. I mean, most of us Canadians do. It was stupid. It got pulled at the last minute. I'm grateful. And I will be traveling with all my pets across the border later this month.
Only Pierre Poilievre would blame the CBC for you not being able to bring your dog to the States.
Yeah, defund the CDC.
Sorry,
Yeah.
CDC, CBC,
Defund.
no shot for them this week.
Okay. I think we understand your point.
Sorry, that's too fast. All right, well, that's this August edition of Hotel Pacifico. I want to thank our guest, Angus Reid, for joining us today. I want to thank our presenting sponsor, TELUS and Fortis BC. We will see you next week, guests. BC, you can never leave.
Checkout time at Hotel Pacifico. We hope you enjoyed your stay.